Hey everyone, I'm Peter Barron. Thank you for tuning into this case study with Indian Creek School. I'm really excited to learn more about the work that they've done to iterate the independent school business model. But before we get into that, this is Booth Kyle. He's the head of school. Booth, welcome to the case study, and thank you for sharing your story.
Hey, thanks for having me, Peter. It's great to see you, and happy to share all that we've done here at the school.
Yeah, great to see you too, Booth. And listen, before we dig into the work that you did, can you set up Indian Creek? Like, where are you? What kind of school type are you? Those sorts of things.
Sure, yeah. So Indian Creek is in Crownsville, Maryland. It's just outside of Annapolis, Maryland. And this is, in fact, our 50th year, so we're doing a lot of celebrating about that. The school was founded in 1973, and it was first founded as an elementary school, and then I think probably in the late 70s, added a middle school, and then in 2006 started a high school. So now in this version of Indian Creek, we are pre-K to 12, and obviously from that description, it's been iterating for a long time, like literally throughout our entire existence. So right now we have about 555 students. And if you break it down by division, there's definitely a small school feel to the institution.
Mm.
But being 550, I guess that makes us probably medium sized by independent school standards.
Yeah.
But each of the divisions feel pretty tight and community oriented.
And so you how long have you been there, Booth?
This is my fifth year.
3 or 4 years now. 5th year. Oh my God, it's crazy how time flies. When you got there, like what was the state of the school at that point, and what were some of the things that you needed to focus on out of the gate?
Well, one of the primary drivers to attracting me to the school was that they were intent on selling the original campus where the lower school and middle school that I just referred to were originally founded, and moving the entire student population over to its newer upper school campus. So when I signed my employment agreement, the sale of that campus was just about to be completed, and in fact, it was completed about a month after I signed my contract. So that was just a really interesting project for me to be involved in. And needless to say, if you've done the math already, I've been here for 5 years. I landed here the year that COVID began. So lots of stuff shifted and changed really right off the bat in my first year. I was on the ground for about 7 or 8 months, and then the pandemic started. But
I remember some of those calls. Yeah.
And then I guess also important to note, and just outlining the beginning of my experience here, was that the school, because the upper school had been founded in 2006, and a couple years after that, the sort of Great Recession that impacted lots of independent schools happened, and really, I think in hindsight, from my seat, the school probably never really got its footing with the high school founding and inception. So for probably throughout the 2010s, there had been some enrollment struggles. Retention became an issue. And then simply managing 2 campuses in light of those enrollment struggles really became a lot for the school to cope with. And when I started, not only did I have the project of migrating all pre-K to 12 to one campus, my main charge was to ensure that the school no longer operate in operational deficits. And my first year, I was asked to not lose $750,000 off the bottom line. So that's what sort of set the stage for so much of my work.
So before we get into that, so when you were migrating from one campus to another, was there a building project happening on the new campus at the same time to house the middle and lower school?
That was the plan. The plan was to a campaign had already been started, a capital campaign to build a new building on the larger campus. But then when the pandemic hit and all the challenges of permitting and lending and fundraising hit, we pivoted and decided not to build a new building, but in fact to renovate the current academic building and put an addition on it. And that was it was more cost effective, and it we could avoid all these sort of permitting shortfalls that really would have hampered the project. And we were operating with some urgency, Peter. We the pandemic had all sorts of uncertainties, but we were certain that we wanted to get everybody to the same campus. We had some financial implications if that wouldn't happen, and it had been just part of the school strategy for so long to get it accomplished. It just seemed like it just had to be done.
So when you sold the campus, did the proceeds, were they able to fund the addition? Was that the
part
model?
of it? Part of the proceeds funded the project. Part of it was fundraised. Part of it was lending.
Got it. So let's roll up our sleeves. So you were told lose less money in year one. Like when you got there, and you're in the midst of a pandemic, you're in the midst of consolidating campuses. Like there was a huge, and you're a brand new head, right? Like new to the area, new to the school. Where did you start? I
knew right off the bat, just in looking before I took the job and looking at the financials, which the school was very forthcoming with, and I got a deep dive look into it. I knew that there was some there was some expense creep that I knew we could tackle right away, and two of them were notably were transportation and dining, and the school was just experiencing pretty significant losses in those areas. So I knew that those were two sort of low-hanging fruit type things that we could develop different models for and save a bunch of money. The other thing was because of the enrollment challenges that I referenced before, I think we didn't have the right FTE model for the number of students we had. So I'd say those three things: transportation, dining, FTE model, were three things that I knew we could tackle right away, and we did. I was on the ground, I said, for about 6, 7, 8 months before the pandemic hit, and we made a lot of progress on planning for all those things for the subsequent academic year. And really kind of fortuitously, it was really lucky that we were able to do a lot of that planning before all heck broke loose with the pandemic.
So what happened when the pandemic set in? I mean, how did you perceive? I mean, you had 4 months of planning, and now all of a sudden,
I don't remember. I really can't remember.
You don't even remember? Yeah. Okay. Fair enough.
No, it was in all seriousness, we had a relatively smooth transition to the teaching model that we had to move to so suddenly. There had been a blended learning program at the school for quite some time, and that platform really gave us a quick way to pivot, but also gave us a lot of confidence that we knew we could deliver in that format. So that was helpful. But yeah, I mean, in all seriousness, and really to answer your question, like I did before, it was like everything changed very suddenly, and we just had to start thinking about everything in different ways.
Well, as kids started to come back, so the following year, kids started to come back to campus, right? Was it that fall of 21 that
we still had the two campuses? Sorry. And that was real lucky. We had the ability to spread out, and it gave us a lot of flexibility. Our lower school kids, our basically pre-K to 5 kids, were on campus really right away, masked, distanced, all that. We probably had about 90% of our kids here on a daily basis. And at the upper school, we gave the kids some more flexibility to kind of opt in or out of in-person really on a daily basis. So I'd say on average, we had about 50% of our high school kids here on a daily basis, and the other half were at home, on their computers.
So as the kids were coming back, did you turn back to thinking through, the cost model and how you were going to manage that moving forward?
Yeah, we were nervous about enrollment right away. So I made some pretty quick decisions that spring, right after the pandemic set in, about people who would or would not return for the following year, and that was tough. But it was
this is staffing wise,
FTE model. Yep.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
as I said before, we'd done some planning about that already, and essentially we just followed through on it, and we're able to trim about 5 full-time positions, and that saved us a lot of money, obviously. And vis-a-vis those other 2 big items that I talked about, dining and transportation, we were able to think about those things independently of one another, mainly because we didn't have any transportation program, just didn't exist. So that kind of came offline. And same thing with dining. It's just we said for that first year, we're just not going to serve lunch at school, bring your own lunch, et cetera. So fortunately for us, when we brought those back online a year after, we just had a totally different model. And we were able to rethink the bus routes that we run, kind of eliminate those that had 2, 3, 4, 5 riders, just took them off the books altogether. And then with dining, we went from a model where dining was incorporated into tuition and made it a sort of fee-based program. And that saved us literally $500,000 a year.
So you had to opt in versus getting it as an inclusive piece. Yeah. Booth, when you were looking at the transportation model, because I've heard this from a number of heads, right? Like there was actually massive cost savings during the pandemic on transportation just because they weren't running buses and whatnot. When you came back, do you own and operate your own fleet, or do you outsource that?
We have leased minibuses. We have a fleet of 4 of them, and we use all of them in the morning. But prior to leasing those 4 buses, Peter, we owned a larger sort of typical yellow school bus that we'd use for our largest route. But we ended up selling that. It was sort of a loss leader in terms of having to maintain that bus, and just wasn't prudent. But so we have these 4 lease buses. We run that program now at I'm losing my train of thought. It's not there's no loss taken on the bus transportation model now. There's no gain. It's just break even. And the risk that we were worried about was that cutting those sort of small routes, and if that would have any impact on enrollment, and it had 0 impact on enrollment. And we ended up saving about $250,000 actually on our transportation service.
I want to get to the revenue side, because I know you did some things on that end too, but you said you had to trim your FTEs. That's not an easy thing to do for a whole bunch of reasons. I mean, there's emotional reasons, all of it, right? So how did you approach that?
Yeah, I think because I had that charge that, when I arrived, it was, I had the support of the board to make some tough decisions about really anything and everything. And, I guess I was really well mentored before I got here. And I knew that the FTE model is just relative to how many kids you have. And that was tough. And it was, I honestly had to let go of some people in this format just over Zoom, in that first spring. And it was rough. But again, really to answer your question, I had the necessary support to make the decision. And that was empowering and made me feel as secure as I could in having some really tough conversations.
You mentioned mentorship, right? Such a huge part of my career and so many others. The head of school job is one of the most difficult jobs I've ever, encountered, right? Just talking to heads, it's just like the challenges that come. I mean, massive opportunities too, right? Like there's a lot of gratifying aspects to the work, but there's a lot of difficult stuff too. You've mentioned modeling a few times throughout this, and I'm really intrigued. Like, how did you build your analytical skills in order to really approach this job in a way that allowed you to help the school find success and success that's aligned to mission, right?
Well, great question. My background was primarily admissions and financial aid. So I guess, my antenna have been up to this type of discussion for a long time, just based on that background. Going back to when I was a little kid, Peter, I was a huge baseball card guy, and I remember having just the backs of baseball players' baseball cards memorized. I knew all their statistics, kind of how statistics relate to one another. So that's always just kind of been in my DNA, I guess. But then more practically, my mentor at my former school did a really great job in how he managed the leadership team. And literally the project of annual school budgeting became a leadership team task. And it would depend year to year what our head would ask us to do when we would come and be prepared for those budget talks. But some years it was like, all right, you need to present 3 versions of your budget. One is spend 10% less than you did this year. One is spend the same amount. One is spend 10% more, and be able to rationalize why each and any of those could work. And it really forced us to be really thoughtful about how we were approaching our work and what we needed to support it, money wise. So that kind of focus and attention, it was rigorous, but I feel lucky that's what I came up through, and that alone has prepared me really well for this job.
Are you carrying that forward with your team?
Yes, the same process is in place here now, and it was interesting. It was I think it was hard for people to adapt to it, because from what I can tell previously, and this is nobody's fault, but I think all the financial discussions were held by a very small group of people, and didn't go out beyond sort of closed doors. But to make it more collaborative and to make it part of literally all 15 leadership team people's jobs is a great way to build a team. And it's builds trust and accountability, and like everyone's got a say in how we're going to spend money.
Yeah.
And that's really important.
Yep.
Needless to say, the leadership team doesn't decide what the final budget is. I mean, that's what we have our board of trustees for. But we're able to,
of course. But you have to
right.
propose
But we
it,
have a
right?
very well thought out, very thoughtful, very well presented budget in the end, which is not easy, or is easy to approve.
And I promise you, I still want to get to the revenue side, because there's two sides to the coin here. But when you're introducing a new methodology, especially around budgeting, like I remember the first time I had to budget, what a mess. I wasn't grounded in a framework, right? And you're bringing a framework, but sometimes the framework, it could be amazing, but if you don't have the proper skill set to support how to approach the framework, then you may end up spinning your wheels. Like, how did you help your team build skills in order to get to the place where you're really kind of optimizing the way that you want to budget?
That's a great question. I think of course there's the typical PD routes that a business officer or someone from your business office or your admission people can attend. And we've typically done all those kinds of things. I think probably what's just most helpful is a consistent beating of the drum from me that we're allowed to think about things in new and different ways. And maybe this part of this will attach to your desire to get to the revenue side, but I've always, for a long time, I've thought that independent schools can do more for the public, because we have such beautiful campuses and we have amazing facilities, and there's something that we can share with more than the 550 kids that go to my school. And there's a logical way to do that by renting facilities, by creating partnerships with other organizations that open up your facility and make it kind of a win-win for everybody. So it's just I think that my leadership in that realm maybe what's been most beneficial to the leadership team, just to think differently about school, think differently about what we do, because it doesn't have to be the same way that we did it 10 years ago.
Was that a hard shift for some folks?
Sure.
Or was it
Sure. I
freeing?
think,
Yeah.
for people that have a harder time with change, I mean, it's, some people are hardwired that way. It's not a problem. It's something that can be overcome.
Right.
But I
Sure.
think that the culture at my school is such that there is a nimbleness and a kind of a, like, let's roll our sleeves up and figure this out kind of mentality that's pervasive. So it's certainly helpful to have that kind of culture, and then to have the message for me like layered on top of it.
Yeah, I mean, because historically, you're still a relatively young school, right? So in many ways, you're probably still working from that kind of startup, scrappy. It's baked into your DNA. Yeah. Well, what about the revenue side? I mean, I think you alluded to campus rentals and things like that, but it's one thing to cut, in your budget, and then it's another thing to make sure that you're no longer losing. Now you're starting to earn, a surplus at the end of the year. What did you do?
Okay. Well, let me start with admissions. So, I worked in admissions for a long time, so I knew that we could do some things right away, like being more rigorous with our not just hitting the bottom line for 550 students, but by getting the 550 students in the spots that we wanted them, having class size is consistent, top to bottom. So we became more rigorous about that right away. Attached to that, more thought and discipline about who we were awarding financial assistance to and when, how long a student might carry financial assistance with them through their experience. All of that was addressed right away. So enrollment-wise, we ended up we didn't necessarily make huge strides numbers-wise over time. We have, but it was really just more of a disciplined approach to enrollment, which has really helped, not only in terms of the kid numbers, but it relates to the FTE numbers too, because with that more predictable model of students migrating from one part of the school to another over the years, we're right-sized faculty-wise. And before, it was a little bit scattershot. We were like, oh, wow, we've got a big class coming up. We need an extra specialist for blah.
Right.
So we've eliminated that. So that's all better. In terms of other revenues, so we're a young school, and particularly with an upper school that was founded in 2006, we don't have a high volume of high school graduates from Indian Creek that are able to give large sums of their income to us. I mean, they're still they're like in their 30s now,
still young.
And
the
oldest are in their 30s. So I knew that annual fund revenue, while it was something that we could improve, it wasn't something that we were ever going to be able to rely on in sort of the typical independent school model. So for us, alternative revenue streams were hugely important. And before I got here, the school invested some money and put in a really impressive athletic complex. And there are a couple turf fields and a baseball field and a bunch of tennis courts. And over time, we've been able to develop some partnerships with local sport clubs and develop real sort of contractual arrangements with those clubs. And annually, we bring in about $550,000 a year through rentals to particularly two big sport clubs, a field hockey club and a soccer club. So with a school that's happy to raise $500,000 in annual fund revenue a year, adding that other $500,000 in rental revenue is huge. It makes us solvent, and we can operate in a more traditional way. we've now got it fine-tuned enough, Peter, where we're able to sock away a bunch of money annually as in an operational surplus into a fund that's going to help keep up the athletic complex that will need extra attention because it gets a lot of use. So that's worked really well.
Have there been any challenges with the contractual relationships with the two clubs? Like, do you have to compete for field time, or does it work out well?
The contractual arrangements make it good for us because, they basically sign a contract saying they're going to use it X amount of time during an academic year, and we can just rely on that revenue. So it's good for us. The hardest thing is safety and security, I'd say. It's probably forced us to invest more in safety and security in terms of personnel than we had originally thought we would, but that's okay. Keeping the campus safe is, no one's arguing about that.
Right.
Summer school is another revenue generator, and we've got a kind of a hybrid model. We've got like a summer camp, summer school kind of model, and I'm hopeful that we can continue to develop the school part of that. The camp runs pretty well and is pretty reliable.
Is the school component, is that run by academic year faculty, or do you bring outside folks in?
So far academic year faculty, but kind of along the lines of your question, I hope that we can develop it. I think that we could have people that would come in from outside to supplement what we're teaching, what we're offering. And I think that we've seen over the years that particularly high school students who want to accelerate or who have something they want to bone up on a little bit, having summer course offerings, it's not a stretch to offer those things and to pretty much know that people will sign up.
Any other revenue streams, or were those the primary
Those are the primary ones. We we do other things like rent out our auditorium and things like that, but they're not as I'd say that they're probably more typical of what a lot of schools do, but we're really kind of running a side business with particularly with the athletic rentals.
When we've been talking for 25 minutes or so right now, and what I'm hearing is like you did a lot of optimization. Like you saw opportunities that were already there, but not necessarily activated, and you went and activated, whether it was the fields or looking at the staffing model or dialing in enrollment. Is that a fair assessment? Like, is that how you were looking at Indian Creek when you arrived? Like, how can I optimize this to get us to a better, to get us to a revenue positive place?
That sounds like a better way than I would probably described it. But yeah.
Well, I have the benefit of listening.
Yeah. No. I mean, honestly, I was just thinking, all right, where are we going to find the money? That's kind of what was driving me on a daily basis.
Right.
And now that I say that, now that I acknowledge that, say that out loud, I think that was really important for me to be kind of driven by that goal. Where are we going to find the money?
Sure.
And that turned into optimization of these different pieces of the school. Just like you're running a business, right? It's like you ask somebody in the leadership team to take a look at something, and can you please deliver a report to the group a month from now based on what you find. And we did a whole series of those and came up with better ways to do things as a result.
So as we begin to wrap up, you arrived, so now you're in your fifth academic year, so you arrived effectively little over 4 years ago. Where did you end up after the first year, and like what were the subsequent years in terms of the budget?
Yeah, so I think I said in the beginning, I was asked not to lose $750,000. We ended up with about a $350,000 deficit that first year.
Mm-hmm.
So,
right, in the midst of COVID.
In the midst of COVID, and to be fair, we did experience some pretty minor savings at the end of that academic year after we kind of shut the school building down for the last 3 months.
Sure,
but I think you're aware of how these schools operate. Most of the expenses are out the door at the start of the year, and there's not much at the end of the year.
There's a lot of hard costs.
So, and then subsequent to that, Peter, we've really proud that we've operated with operational surpluses every single year since then.
Yeah, that's
And
great. That's great.
yeah, I mean, the year before I got here, it was just not that way, and we're feeling. I think operationally, we're obviously proud of the accomplishment. I think that it's pervasive, though. The faculty now knows that they can rely on raises every year. They're not going to be shortchanged. To that optimization point, one thing that we did, we started in my first year was just put a committee together to focus on compensation and benefits, and then from that developed a 5-year plan to enhance compensation and benefits. And we've been chipping away at that, ever since. And, just gives the faculty a sense that, okay, we're trying to improve, we're trying to get better, and they're listening to us and they're trying to take care of us.
Yeah, I mean, I think transparency around those things is critical, right? Lack of good solid information, other narratives form.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, last question. I've had the benefit of talking to just dozens of heads. It's just some clear themes have emerged. And there's this desire to iterate the independent school business model so that it doesn't lose sight of mission, but it also puts the school in a much more stable financial place. In fact, I think NAIS just published some data a couple weeks ago saying 91% of heads, and we're recording this in September, but 91% of heads ranked school sustainability as a top challenge for themselves. And as you went about approaching iterating the model, right, like finding those optimization places, you've told your story and it's really cool to see what you've done. If a head were to call you today and say, Booth, like where should I start? Like what advice would you give that head?
Yeah, great question. As I hope, I've been able to detail, we address so many different pieces of the school, right? So it's a fair question to ask, where do you start? I think building an approach that incorporates all sorts of people, trustees, leadership team, particularly, a CFO, finance director needs to be right at the middle of all this. I'm sorry I haven't mentioned my finance director until now. She's amazing, and none of it would have happened without her. I think a team approach is necessary. And, if you want to rethink the business model, I think it requires lots of people to be committed to it, because you do need to have trust and accountability, and you obviously want to avoid, like me, want to avoid sitting in my office just making crazy decisions about slashing budgets, on my own. And I think what we've proven here is that it's doable. Like we're a pretty traditional independent school. We have if you look at our budget, now it's sort of, we're spending money on sort of the traditional things, but we put it together maybe in a different way than a more legacy school would, and it gives me hope that you don't have to be the institution that's just flush with cash to be able to operate a real quality school. And so I'd say build a team that you think can get it done with you, and ask all the right questions and focus on the right things to put those pieces together. The last thing I'll say is this, Peter. We when we moved here and got all 550 kids here on the same campus, we hear all the time from everybody how there's not enough space, and there's not enough space. We wish that we had more space, and I think someday we will have more space. But very specific to that point, and one of the optimizations that we engaged in was sort of a variation of that FTE model, but an analysis of classroom usage. Okay, so in other words, how many rooms do we really need to teach our program? And I saw a report just a couple weeks ago that one of our people put together, and we basically have about 25 middle and upper school teaching rooms where where any class can be taught in the upper school or middle school. And 70% of those 25 rooms, 68% of those 25 rooms have a class in there every single period. and the other 32% have a class in there basically 85 to 90% of the time. And yeah, so we're kind of maxed out, and
I was going to say, yeah.
but in a good way. And I can't wait for the day when the rubber hits the road and I'm making a pitch about why we need to build a new arts facility. You know,
Right.
I've got the data, and it's like there's no room
Right.
to move, guys. If we want to, accelerate the program and have more kids, we need more room. So,
Yeah. I said a second ago that was my last question. I do have one more though. Like, as you were working through all of this over the last 4 or 5 years, what role did the board play for you?
really, really more, I'd say, supportive than getting in the details of all that I've laid out. There was urgency when I began my job here to get the finances right. So, I heard that message loud and clear, check. And then, I've been proactive in communicating the progress, the challenges, things we've missed. And that relationship has been productive. The board is happy that we're making the progress we're making. We're right now doing some strategic thinking about the next 5 years, which I think all of what I've been talking about will be really kind of more front and center for a larger portion of the board. And I think that they're going to be energized by what they hear and as optimistic as I am about the future of the school because of all the good work.
Well, Booth Kyle, head of school at Indian Creek, right outside of Annapolis, Maryland. Thanks for sharing your story. It's really it's been a lot of fun to watch, the school transform over the last 5 years, and I can't wait to see what the next 5 years.
You got to
brings.
come out and see us, Peter. Thanks for doing what you're doing, buddy.
Yeah, you got it. I got to get out there. All right. Thanks, Booth.